You guys.
I give you Joe Kreye.
All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for showing up. If you see a cat walk behind me, don't be shocked. You know, this is the world we live in. So we're going to start this morning looking at local redistricting in Wisconsin. This first part of this part of the morning, I'll be myself, Mike Gallagher, and Stacy Duros. We're all from the Legislative Reference Bureau. Mike and I are drafting attorneys, and Stacy is a legislative analyst. Before I get into the law and principles of redistricting, just a little bit about the Legislative Reference Bureau. The LRB was founded in 1901. It is, well, it provides legal research and informational services. It's one of 5 nonpartisan legislative agencies that serve the Wisconsin legislature. The LRB drafts all legislation. It prepares the executive budget bill. It drafts bill amendments, writes analyses of legislation, conducts legal, public policy, and historical research, and provides information about the legislature and its proceedings. Additionally, we publish the laws of Wisconsin, the Wisconsin statutes and annotations, the Wisconsin Administrative Code and Register, and the Wisconsin Blue Book. In short, we do a lot of stuff related to Wisconsin law and legislation. In the redistricting process, we will eventually draft the redistricting bill. So that's a fairly brief overview of the LRB. I'm going to share my screen here and we can get to redistricting law and principles. Bear with me a second here. All right. There we go. So we'll start with looking at the terminology first. The term reapportionment and redistricting seem to be used interchangeably, even though technically the terms refer to different things. Reapportionment refers to dividing or redividing the number of seats of the U.S. House of Representatives, and based on our portion of the national population. Whereas redistricting is the process by which electoral districts, our local districts, Assembly, Senate, Aldermanic, Supervisory districts, are redrawn periodically to adjust for shifts in population and ensure the proper representation for all potential voters. But why do we redistrict in the first place? Well,
Hey, Joe, I'm just going to interrupt for a second. You're still on your title slide.
Am I?
Yeah. So down in the right-hand corner. Yeah.
I'm seeing my slides. Do you want to take over, maybe?
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Is everybody else having that issue?
What are you saying, Ryan? Or is his slides advancing?
Yeah. If you're sharing your entire desktop, you usually can see the pop-up then that comes up with the PowerPoints. So if you have it just as sharing the window of PowerPoint, you're only going to see the editor side of PowerPoint.
So what are you seeing, Ryan?
So we just see what you see when you open up PowerPoint. The pop-up that comes up when you're sharing your screen isn't visible, which is what the full screen look is. So if you go to sharing and then go to share desktop, you'll be able to see the whole thing.
Yeah, right. In Zoom, go to share desktop, and then it'll give you the option to choose the PowerPoint. Otherwise, I can go ahead and do it, Joe, and just
if you don't mind.
Advance the slides. Okay, hold on a second. I'll pull it up. All right, 1 second.
The beauty of technology.
Okay. So you're on slide.
We're on federal constitutional requirements.
There we go.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, no problem.
The U.S. Constitution mandates that congressional seats be apportioned to the states according to the population count from the federal census. Specifically, let's see where we're at here. Specifically, Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution provides that the actual enumeration should be made within 3 years after the first meeting of Congress. Of course, that's already happened. And within every subsequent term of 10 years in such manner as they shall by law direct. Congress has given the responsibility for doing that to the U.S. Department of Commerce and the U.S. Census Bureau. And then we also have Amendment 14, Section 2 to the U.S. Constitution, which further clarifies that representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers, counting the whole number of persons in each state. These two constitutional provisions and Title 13 of the U.S. Code provide for the process of a complete count of the United States population every 10 years in order to reallocate the 435 seats of the United States House of Representatives to account for population changes. The federal decennial census kicks off the whole process. Depending on shifts in population that are determined by that most recent census, some states will gain congressional seats, some states will lose seats, and the majority of them are likely to retain the number of seats. Wisconsin, we don't anticipate losing or gaining a seat this next round. After all the congressional seats have been reapportioned, each state must redraw congressional and legislative districts. In Wisconsin, the state's bicameral legislature, composed of the Senate and the Wisconsin State Assembly, has the power to redraw both congressional and legislative districts, subject to the governor's approval. In Wisconsin, redistricting laws are enacted in the same way as any other law. So they go through the lawmaking process. The governor gets his chance to approve or disapprove of that plan. Like all states during the process of redistricting, Wisconsin's congressional and legislative districts must comply with two federal requirements: equal population and minority protection. So we'll go through those fairly briefly. The case law on that is fairly complicated. I don't want to get in the weeds too much with that, but we do have to discuss that. Equal population is the most crucial principle involved in redistricting. It's pretty much the catalyst for the whole process. And that concept means that electoral districts should be equal in population so that they do not violate the one person, one vote principle that has come through the U.S. Supreme Court cases, beginning back roughly in the 1960s. That principle is embedded in the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. If districts were drawn disproportionately with respect to population, the weight of each vote would be different. For example, in an underpopulated district, a vote might be worth more than an overpopulated district, where a vote would be worth less. So when districts are drawn with equal population, each resident has equal access to government, no matter where he or she lives. So there are certain concepts we're going to talk about, the first being ideal population. So the number for equal population is calculated using the concept of the ideal population, or the target population for each equal population district under the plan. This figure can be calculated by dividing the total population of the unit being divided into districts by the number of districts being created. This, of course, applies to a single member district, which is what we operate under. If it were a multiple member district, you would divide the total population by the actual number of representatives to get that same number. So now we can go on to the next slide. So as an example here, the Wisconsin Department of Administration's Demographic Service Center has an estimate for our population as of January 1st, 2019. Obviously, we wouldn't be using that estimate for actual redistricting. We are obligated to use the census data. But if we were to use those numbers, the state population, based on that estimate, is 843,443. If you divide that by the 33 Senate districts, you have Senate districts with an ideal population of 177,074. If you do the math for the Assembly districts, we have 99 of those. Your ideal population for an Assembly district is 59,025. And by the way, for a congressional district, using that estimate, it would be 730,430. And as we move on to some of the other examples, I'm going to use a number that's a little easier to deal with. So for purposes of figuring out these formulas, we're going to assume if you have a state population of 5 million and there are 50 legislative districts, the ideal population for each district would be 100,000. That'll make doing the math a lot easier for me, if nothing else. Another statistical measurement to check how well the districting affects our efforts to achieve population equality is by calculating the absolute deviation, the difference between the population of a given district and the ideal population. It assesses the degree by which a single district's population varies, either exceeding or falling short from the ideal population. Absolute deviation is derived by subtracting the ideal population from the population of a given district. That number is used to determine the extent to which an actual district is larger, has a plus deviation, i.e. a positive value, or smaller, has a negative deviation or negative value than the ideal district size. That number can also be expressed as a percentage, which indicates the proportion by which the population exceeds or falls short of the ideal population. And that number is determined by dividing a district's absolute deviation by the ideal population. The result is called a relative deviation. So going back to our simple example, if the ideal population per district is 100,000 and the actual population is 99,000, the absolute deviation would be negative 1,000. The relative deviation would be negative 1%. Both absolute deviation and relative deviation are used to assess equality of population at the district level. The overall range, or the difference in population between the smallest and the largest districts, can be used as a measurement that evaluates the redistricting plan at the state level as a whole, or at the local level as well. But again, we're looking at the plan as a whole. So for example, if the largest district's population is 101,000 and the smallest district's population is 98,000, the overall range is 3%. How did we get there? We start with the ideal population, which is 100,000. We know that the largest district is plus 1,000, the smallest district minus 1,000. We, in essence, are adding those together and ignoring the plus and minus signs to get 3,000 people, which is the overall range, or 3%. During litigation, courts normally measure a redistricting plan using this concept of overall range, but the courts might refer to it using a number of different terms, such as total deviation, total population difference, total percentage deviation, but they're talking about the same thing. We'll talk a little more about this idea that less than 10% in the overall range is generally regarded as complying with the principle of one person, one vote, but we'll get back to that in just a second here. Technically, there are different constitutional standards for establishing equal protection in congressional districts and state legislative districts, but the overall concept of one person, one vote holds either way. Congressional districts must be as nearly equal in population as practicable, with the lowest possible deviation from ideal population, and no level of population inequality is deemed too small to be looked at by the courts. That means that the population equality standard is strictly enforced at the congressional district level. That is not the case on the local level. We have a little more latitude for legislative districts and at the local level. State legislative districts must be drawn with substantial equality, with an overall range of 10% from the ideal population being our target. Although it's not a safe harbor, you could have something that's less than 10% and still be a challenge for different reasons. Wisconsin has historically been way below that 10% threshold. Going back to 1982, we've been under 2%, and you can see the data there. The courts actually in 1982, the federal court that drew the map then, really didn't think it was necessary to deviate as high as 10% and thought under 2% was what we should shoot for. And we've done a pretty good job here in the state getting under 2% for overall range. The next thing we need to talk about is the second really important principle when drawing these plans is protection of minorities. Really, we're talking about racial and ethnic minority protection from vote dilution, and I'll get into that a little more as well. While the Supreme Court worked through population equality and inequality issues, Congress enacted the Voting Rights Act of 1965 to kind of remedy the inequality of opportunity given to racial and ethnic minorities to participate in elections. Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act prohibited any state or political subdivision from opposing a voter qualification or prerequisite to voting or standard, practice, or procedure to deny or abridge the right to vote on account of race or color. In practice, at its most basic level, redistricting map may be constitutionally challenged if it splits up a race or language minority group and combines it with members of a majority group, which effectively limits its ability to elect a candidate of its choice, and that is known as vote dilution. The language minority group is usually we're talking about Hispanic groups, Asian language, and some Native American language groups are the typical group we're talking about. Do you have that slide, Mike, with the changes to the Voting Rights Act, or did I kind of breeze through that?
Yeah, that was, let's see here. This one.
Right there, okay. No, it has been amended a couple of times. 1975, we're talking about the members of the language minority group. In 1982, Section 2 was made to apply to any plan that results in discrimination against a member of a racial or language minority group, regardless of the intent of the drafters, of the plan's drafters. So before that time, you had to really intend to discriminate, whereas of now, the fact that there's actual discrimination that has the effect of discriminating against a minority group, that will get you in trouble under the Voting Rights Act. So a redistricting plan in which the voting strength of a minority group is diluted is most often constitutionally challenged because the plan violates either the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment or the plan violates Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. All right. So other than the federal principles for equal population and protection of minority groups, many states impose additional requirements referred to generally by the courts as traditional redistricting principles. And these include compactness, contiguity, preserving the unity of local political subdivisions, preserving communities of interest, and we'll get to also competitiveness as well, although districts are frequently not competitive. Compactness, it's really, the courts a lot of times look at what they call an eyeball test. There are mathematical tests to figure out whether something is compact or not compact. And so the standard varies somewhat. But as you can see, the district on your left seems obviously compact, whereas the district on your right, not so much. Sometimes another way to do this, besides just eyeballing the district, is if you were to draw a circle around the district, the kind of white space around the district, if you have a lot of it, that would seem to suggest the district isn't compact. This one's a pretty obvious example that one is compact and one is not. The next slide, then, Mike, thanks. Contiguity. All areas within the district should be physically adjacent. We do have things called island territory where usually it happens with annexations, where you have a piece of, say, the city of Madison is somewhere away from where most of the city of Madison is, and they're connected by a road or some other sort of geographic boundary. Again, the one on the left is completely contiguous. The one on the right, not so much. Next slide, Mike. Communities of interest. This one's a little more, the legal term I think is squishy. Actually it's a little hard to determine a community of interest. The general principle that it's desirable to group like-minded or similar people so they may elect their representative, but this is different than, say, a racial or ethnic group. And some of the court cases in Wisconsin that have drawn maps, they really try to get more subjective information. How does this neighborhood, for instance, interact with other neighborhoods near it? Is it one kind of unified community? Do they have a point of view? Again, it's hard to define, but courts will oftentimes try to gather information and try to figure out what those communities are. Next slide there, Mike. Unity of political subdivisions. Basically, we try as much as we can to avoid crossing a boundary, a county, city, or town boundary when drawing the district. It's not always possible, but we try to avoid it, or at least limit it. It's not completely unavoidable. So the map on the left looks like it follows the districts pretty well. The map on the right, not so much, although I personally find that to be a much more aesthetically pleasing map to look at. So, but that's not the standard. You get no points for being artsy. Next slide, Mike. We're near the end here, probably. So if we look at the Wisconsin constitutional requirements, Wisconsin doesn't have a deadline. Well, it does have a deadline of sorts for the state legislature to adopt a redistricting plan. Section 3 of Article 4 requires the legislature to apportion and district anew after each census according to the number of inhabitants. So because census day is April 1st, 2020, the next round of redistricting would be scheduled to take place during the next legislative session, our 21-23 session, which ends on January 2nd, 2023. There is no similar deadline in the Wisconsin Constitution for congressional redistricting. However, filing nominations for the partisan primary and declaring candidacy also factor into that deadline. Those maps for congressional districts, they typically have not been controversial in the state as far as drawing those. Section 4 requires assembly districts to be bounded by county, precinct, town, and ward lines. They consist of contiguous territory and be as compact to perform as practicable, which again, we talked about is those are your traditional redistricting principles. And Section 5 requires Senate districts to be of convenient contiguous territory. I mentioned a little bit about competitiveness sometimes being a traditional redistricting principle, but again, that's it typically doesn't come into play unless it's really obvious. For instance, that the map drawers have pitted a number of incumbents against one another, or they have severely kind of increased their chances of getting their candidates election. So competitiveness tends to fall by the wayside. Anything else there, Mike, that's on this part of the presentation?
Oh, that sounds good.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Joe.
Thanks
But
for suffering through the technical stuff.
Yeah, that's the thing about redistricting. I mean, it's pretty much all weeds. So,
Yes.
you can say, I'm going to try and stay out of the weeds, but if it's a redistricting presentation, then good luck to you on that. I'm just going to go back to the equal population standard because I got a little disconnected on the slides trying to follow you. But so this is the quote from a recent Supreme Court decision. I think it was in 2016, where the court summarized its previous case law with respect to equal population. So as Joe said, congressional districts have to be as nearly equal as possible. But as you can see in this quote, state, but also local legislative districts have to be, or not have to be, but they're generally considered constitutional, or they're presumed constitutional if they are 10% or less. But that doesn't mean that they can't still be challenged. It's just that the court handling such a challenge will presume that they are constitutional, and the burden is really on the people challenging the map to show that even though it's within that 10% range, it's still unconstitutional for purposes of equal population. So it's a kind of a safe harbor, but in the legal terminology is it's a rebuttable presumption. So we got a presumption, it can be rebutted. So, all right. Okay, can everybody see that? Can you hear me? Okay. All right. So yeah, equal population, it's substantially equal, 10%, just like state legislative districts with respect to county supervisory districts and city aldermanic districts. It doesn't apply to wards, and I'll talk a little bit about that. The other federal requirements also apply to local electoral districts. And so when we're talking about, primarily minority protection, districts can't be drawn in such a way as to discriminate against racial, language, or ethnic minorities. And that can happen in a few different ways. And what Joe mentioned was vote dilution. And that's probably the most typical, which is that you've got a compact community of a racial or language minority, but in drawing the maps, the legislature splits up that group between several districts so that it's not a majority in any of them, and then obviously can't elect a candidate of its choice, assuming it votes as a block. And so that also applies in the local redistricting context. Okay. So with respect to the process itself, local redistricting in Wisconsin occurs in 3 phases and requires the cooperation and coordination among counties and their respective municipalities. The process starts at the county level in phase 1 with counties adopting tentative county supervisory district plans. It moves to the municipal level in phase 2, in which municipalities adjust ward boundaries as needed. And then it concludes in phase 3 with counties adopting final supervisory district plans and cities adopting aldermanic district plans. Each of the 3 phases consists of a 60-day work period, and each phase must be completed before the next phase may begin. Okay. While each phase of the local redistricting process requires that work be completed within 60 days, the statutes also, I'm just going to mention this once, I'm not going to mention every time for each phase, provide a court process for the courts to actually intervene if at any stage the appropriate plan hasn't actually been passed by the county board or the common council of a city. Essentially, after the 60-day period is up, there's a 14-day window for anybody in the county or in the municipality to go to court and ask the court to put in a plan in place temporarily until the county or municipality plan is actually adopted. So, and that's for all 3 phases. All right. So the official publication of the census data at the block level and block level census maps for Wisconsin starts the clock ticking on the whole process. The data is typically received about 1 year after the date of the census. So for example, in the last redistricting cycle, census data was received on March 10th, 2011. So, 3 weeks early, basically. But, we're in a global pandemic, and it didn't leave the Census Bureau unscathed, and their field operations were significantly delayed because of COVID. And so that may or may not affect the timeline. At this point in time, it's hard to predict, and I'll talk about that at the end of the presentation. All right, so moving on to phase 1. So within 60 days after publication of the census data for Wisconsin, like I said, that typically happens by the end of March in the year after the census, but no later than July 1 following the year of the decennial census. That's kind of, that's the backstop for the first part of the process. The statutes require each county board to adopt a tentative county supervisory district plan. The county board's proposed plan sets forth the number of supervisory districts and tentative district boundaries, or a description of boundary requirements. So what are the county board's duties in passing a proposed plan? So the county board must solicit suggestions from municipalities. And again, everything that I'm talking about here, this is all statutory. While there are statutes that deal with congressional and state legislative redistricting, the local redistricting process, has a detailed statutory regime that governs it. And you'll see the citations as we go through the slides. But anyway, so solicit suggestions from the municipalities. Hold a public hearing. After the public hearing, of course, the plan can be amended based on testimony at the hearing. Submit a copy of the proposed plan to each municipal governing body in the county. In the event that a municipality needs to be divided between 2 or more supervisory districts that cannot be accommodated within the existing ward plan, the county board must submit a written statement to the municipality indicating the approximate location and population of any proposed wards. So those are the county board's duties. With respect to the plan itself, the number of districts must equal the number of supervisors. The population ranges and associated number of supervisors for counties are set forth in section 5910 of the statutes. Districts must be substantially equal in population, again, applying those principles that Joe outlined earlier, and the presumptive 10% threshold. Districts must generally consist of whole wards or municipalities. The county board may propose splitting municipalities in order to establish the creation of county supervisory districts of substantially equal population. Under the statutes, whenever possible, whole contiguous municipalities or contiguous parts of the same municipality must be placed within the same supervisory district. Finally, territory within each district must be contiguous, except for island territory, as Joe said, that's territory that's separated from by water or by the territory of another municipality. Okay, so moving on to phase 2. In phase 2, municipalities have 60 days after receiving a tentative county supervisory district plan to adjust ward boundaries. But before moving on to discuss the details of phase 2, it's worth taking a moment here to talk about wards because they play an essential role in redistricting at all levels. Wards play, like I said, a central role in redistricting because they're the building blocks from which congressional, state senate, and Senate and Assembly, county supervisory, and city aldermanic districts are all constructed. Ward boundaries are intended to be as permanent as possible, with changes made only to accommodate changes in population, alterations in municipal boundaries, and the mathematical requirements of creating electoral districts of equal population for purposes of one person, one vote. I don't want to move on yet. Okay, so in many states, what Wisconsin calls wards are referred to as precincts, and the U.S. Census Bureau calls them voting districts. But again, it should be noted that they're not electoral districts that have to be constructed based on equal population. We'll talk a little more about that. Yeah, so wards are not subject to one person, one vote. The statutes require that all cities, villages, and towns in Wisconsin with a population of 1,000 or more split into wards. Municipalities under 1,000 are not required to divide into wards, but they may do so to facilitate the administration of elections. The governing body of a municipality in a city, common council, or village or town board is responsible for establishing ward boundaries. An ordinance or resolution describing the ward boundaries must be adopted by a majority of the members of the governing body. In creating wards, municipalities are required to follow the standards that are set forth in section 5.15 of the statutes. Specifically, wards must be comprised of whole census blocks. Wards are constructed by aggregating whole census blocks so that the population of the ward falls within a predetermined range. The census block, of course, is the smallest unit for which population is tabulated and is usually bounded by streets or other prominent physical features. Municipal and county lines may also serve as block boundaries. Blocks may be as small as a typical city block or as large as several square miles in rural areas. Census blocks normally contain fewer than 100 people. So there are a number of exceptions to the whole block requirement. And in the interest of time, I'm going to skip those, but we have a comprehensive redistricting publication that LRB just put out last week. And it covers all of those exceptions. The section on local redistricting is really thorough. So I would encourage you to consult that for anything that I kind of have to gloss over today, just in the interest of time. Wards must suit the convenience of voters. And what the statutes say is that they must be kept compact and observe the community of interest of existing neighborhoods and other settlements. They have to be comprised of contiguous territory. They have to comply with the population ranges specified by law, as I said. And also the statutes say that when they're created, they should be, the population range, population should be set at a convenient point within the applicable range so that as the population shifts over time, the ward can stay stable without having to be adjusted. I mean, it will have to be adjusted potentially at some point, but that's the basic idea. Achieving that, hopefully achieving some permanency in the ward boundaries. And then lie entirely within one municipality and one county. And then finally, they have to be numbered. Okay, so these are the population ranges. And as I said, the statutes say that wards should be established within those ranges with a convenient population in order to accommodate for shifts in population within the ward without necessarily having to come back and redraw boundaries every 10 years. All right, so back to phase 2 now. We were talking about creating wards and wards generally. Now we're back to what happens with wards in phase 2 of the redistricting process. While ward boundaries, as I said, are intended to be as permanent as possible, after the federal decennial census, boundaries may have to be adjusted to do any of the following. Reflect changes in population. And I should also say there are a number of reasons why wards can be established below the population ranges. And again, I would just recommend that you consult our publication on those kind of finer details. Wards have to reflect changes, may have to be adjusted in order to reflect changes in minority population. Again, there's that statutory requirement, which is, very similar to the requirement under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that says that wards should be created in such a way as to give minority populations the best chance to participate in the electoral process and have the opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. Reflect changes in municipal boundaries. Facilitate the establishment of county supervisory districts of equal population. Wards may have to be adjusted even though their population range hasn't changed, they may have to be adjusted to permit the establishment of county supervisory districts of substantially equal population. So under the statutes, a municipality must make a good faith effort to accommodate the county's proposed supervisory district plan and must divide itself into wards in a manner permitting the creation of county supervisory districts of substantially equal population. And of course, the same may be true for aldermanic districts. And then finally, ward boundaries may have to be adjusted to accommodate a previously enacted legislative redistricting plan. So congressional and legislative redistricting typically occurs each decade only after municipalities have adjusted ward boundaries. However, if that situation should be reversed in any redistricting cycle, as it was in the 2010 cycle, municipalities are required to adjust their ward boundaries to the extent necessary to accommodate the previously enacted legislative plan. The amended ordinance or resolution adjusting ward boundaries must be passed by the governing body of the municipality no later than April 10 of the second year following the year of the federal decennial census. So that sets a, it's a pretty far back deadline, but that's not likely to happen this time around. In 2010, the Republicans, the same party controlled both houses of the legislature, and of course the governor was a Republican, and so they passed legislative maps in record time, and then at the same time passed a law that required municipalities to adjust ward boundaries based on that plan. But that's kind of speed is not likely to happen this time around, just as a matter of political reality. All right, so on to the final phase. Okay, I think we're doing pretty well on time here. So following the completion of establishing municipal ward plans, the third and final phase requires counties to adopt final supervisory district plans and requires cities not electing their common council at large to establish aldermanic districts. The county board is required to conduct another public hearing, after which it adopts a final supervisory district plan and numbers the districts. The chairperson of the county board must file a certified plan or a certified copy of it with the Secretary of State, right? Secretary of State, okay. And the Common Council of a city is required, if it doesn't elect its Common Council at large, to redistrict the aldermanic districts within 60 days after adjusting ward boundaries. Aldermanic districts must be as compact in area as possible and contain whole contiguous wards. Those are the statutory requirements. Okay, it looks like I have 2 minutes left. So this is the default timeline. Typically, the whole process will be finished by the end of September in 2021. But as I mentioned earlier, so I'm just going to summarize what the current situation is with the census and the potential for delays in the states getting census data, which, because the local redistricting process can't begin until we have, the official publication of that data, could cause delays to that process. So originally, the Census Bureau was asking Congress, so there are two deadlines that are at issue. One is December 31st, 2020, which is when the Census Bureau is required by federal statute to get the apportionment numbers to the president for purposes of congressional reapportionment. And then March 31, 2021, which is the deadline by which the Census Bureau is required to get census data to the states for purposes of redistricting and everything else that census data is used for. The Census Bureau asked for a 4-month delay because they had to halt field operations when the COVID-19 pandemic hit. These are statutory deadlines, so they asked Congress to pass a statute that push these deadlines back for this redistricting cycle. And there have been bills introduced. I think actually one of the houses, I don't know if it was the Senate or the House of Representatives, actually passed one, but it's stalled. So So those deadlines are still on the statutes, and what the Census Bureau did is it streamlined its operations to try and satisfy those deadlines. And then more recently, in just the past several weeks, there was a lawsuit filed in a federal district court in California that sought to force the Census Bureau to continue field operations beyond when they wanted to finish based on their streamlined processes, and also to lift the December 31 deadline, although they didn't ask for the court to lift the March 31 deadline for districting data going to the states. So that court did both of those things. It stayed that deadline for apportionment counts and said that the Census Bureau had to continue the field operations, I think, through the end of October. That was appealed to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the Ninth Circuit upheld largely the decision, especially the decision that required the Census Bureau to continue its field operations, I think, through the end of October, but it overturned the stay to the deadline, the December 31 deadline. So that could go to the Supreme Court. There could be other litigation, and it's always possible that Congress could, perhaps Congress comes in next year and they pass a law if the Census Bureau still thinks it can't make that March 31 deadline, and then it gets pushed back. And so this is really a situation that's in flux. So I wouldn't spend a lot of time worrying about it right now, but it would be nice to have more certainty. But like many other things right now, we've got a lack of certainty. So this is the election, this 2022 election timeline. And like I said, in a typical redistricting cycle, the September 2021, all local redistricting would be done. So you'd be fine. Nomination papers get circulated starting in December. The deadline for filing nomination papers for the spring primary is January 4, 2023. And so all of that would be under the new maps. But obviously, if there is a delay to having the census data, then it could start to run into that election timeline, and in which case, the elections might have to take place under the old maps. For example, the Census Bureau originally wanted a 4-month delay. So obviously, I think in that case, the election happens under the old maps, but we just don't know, when we'll actually get the data. It may be March 31st. So, and I think that concludes the presentation, so we can take, do we have time for questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
Do we have up to 11:30 for questions? Is that how it's timed?
No, you guys are,
we're done.
Taking questions now. Yeah, that's okay. If there's any questions right now for the LRB, okay, let's go ahead and grab them right now.
Okay, well, once again, I'll just, is there somebody on chat? Let's see here.
It says, should the nomination papers deadline be January 4th, 2022? On your last slide.
I have that wrong on my slide?
It was 2023 on your last slide.
Oh, yes, it is 2022. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for noticing that. I'll correct that. And once again, I'll just plug our publication. It's available on our website. There also should have been a link provided to you in communications about this conference. And it's comprehensive, both with respect to congressional and legislative redistricting, but also local redistricting. And then it also has a history. It has 2 parts. The second part is actually a survey of the history of redistricting in Wisconsin, from territorial days to 2010. So I encourage everybody to look at that. Oh, crash courses?
Yeah, the other question is, with new clerks being elected into counties this fall, will there be any crash courses available to them? What's
our fall schedule look like? Well, no,
Well, I could say that we will be out at the Wisconsin Towns Association, and we will be doing some other things through the County Clerks Association and the Municipal Clerks Association as well. And then we're also
LRB
planning.
will do that too. Yeah.
Right. I should add, LTSB and LRB together. And then there will be another round. We did those regional webinar events in March and April of this year, and we'll do that again in 2021 as well. So yes is the answer. Grace just posted a link to our resources page as well, but we'll keep that updated with more events as we book them. I guess no more questions for right now, unless there's anything else last minute I'm not seeing. Well, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Stacy. So my name is Ryan Squires. I am the GIS manager for LTSB. Can everybody see my slides correctly? As a full screen? Yes? Okay, good. So yeah, as we just mentioned, we'll be doing more events coming up here in the future. One event I was gonna mention tomorrow at the Lion meeting for our LIOs out there. LTSB will be holding a special event in late January, specifically regarding the splitting of blocks and what we call the stage 0. I'll go over it really quickly right now as we go through it, but we'll go a deep dive through it. A lot of you participated in our pilot program that was held in June, and thank you very much for that. And from that, we learned a lot about, a lot of feedback from people. So one of the big things we're kind of redoing and retweaking a little bit is that stage 0 block splitting section. So I'll touch it briefly, as I mentioned, but if you're an LIO and you're really interested in that section, I will do some more announcements about it tomorrow at the Lion meeting, but plan for a kind of a session about that in late January, specifically about that. But we'll also be around too doing other demos and stuff. So, okay, I'm here to talk to you about WiseLR, which is the redistricting software for locals to use for drawing wards and ward supervisory districts and aldermanic districts. So let's go through here. It's kind of odd to see myself. It's throwing me off. All right, so what is WiseLR? So this is the third or fourth iteration of WiseLR, so the Wisconsin Shape Editor for local redistricting. Responsibility of LTSB is to facilitate the technology needs for local legislative and congressional redistricting, and this is the solution that we reinvent every year, for every decade, I should say, for locals to use. It's a web application, so there's no custom software, nothing you can install. Just go ahead and sign in. It's all hosted on the Wise Decade platform, which most counties have been using, actually all counties have been using now for about 6-7 years now. And it's hosted as a separate section. So we'll kind of go through here. WiseLR has some components to it. It's an administrator section. So all the good stuff that was just discussed by Mike and Joe there about, actually specifically Mike, about the process of local redistricting and all the statutes. And as he said, the process is very well laid out, and we try to program that into the structure of the application to help guide you through it and cite as much as we're doing to try to guide counties through the flow of the statutory described process. Another part of WiseLR is the editor, which we actually get to draw your fun maps. But then there's also viewers and stuff that we have that will allow you to spread these maps around and collaborate with other people. So we'll kind of go through all that really quickly. So as I mentioned, this is hosted on the Wise Decade platform that counties use right now to submit things like parcels, municipal boundaries, wards, school districts, all kinds of good stuff. But this is one section of that website, so we don't want there's a lot of people going to be involved in local redistricting, that aren't involved necessarily in the county level GIS stuff. So we have a separate password for them. Your normal password, if you're a Wise Decade user right now, will work for it just fine. Otherwise, your your normal users will be receiving a WiseLaw only password that lets them just into that one section. So if you're a county user, you don't have to worry about somebody submitting something on your behalf to the state for your parcels or whatnot. Those passwords will be distributed out through some programs, but everyone in the county will be sharing the same WiseLaw only password or their traditional WiseDecade password. So here's the WiseDecade login, the URL, wisedecade.legis.wisconsin.gov, and that's the URL that everyone will use to sign into WiseLR. If you're a WiseDecade normal user, you'll see the menu on the left when it first pops up, and then just click the upper right-hand icon, WiseLR, to go to the website. If you're just a WiseLR user, when you enter your password, you go right ahead and you'll go to the right hand side of that page to launch you into the WiseLR editor, or I'm sorry, admin. And then here's the WiseLR administrator page. So, you know, as Mike described, there are three distinct phases in local redistricting. I can't say redistricting; it's a hard word to say for me for some reason. Stage 1, supervisory district drafting. Stage 2, municipal wards, and stage 3, the reconciliation between those plans and also the drafting of aldermanic districts. So you'll see two little extra sections on there, 0 and A. 0 is a step that happens just for LIOs. Right ahead of actual redistricting process. This is this part where LIOs will go through and inspect the US Census block geometry that was annotated with population and compare it with their municipal boundaries. This is the opportunity they have at the beginning of, before anybody actually starts running plans, to make any splits. So LIOs have been submitting their municipal boundaries to LTSB every 6 months for the last 5 years. And we've been updating the Census Bureau with that information through what's called the Consolidated Boundary and Annexation Survey, the CBAS program. So those boundaries should be pretty good. If you were around in 2010, you'll remember how terrible, to put it frankly, the municipal boundaries were in that block geometry and how difficult it was. But I'm looking at like Rock County specifically, to draw boundaries that draw wards using those blocks that actually represented the real geography that was underneath them. There was confusion of, okay, well, this block is straddling a municipal boundary. Is the population in the municipality or not? Hopefully we won't have that problem this time because we've been in communication so much this decade with the Census Bureau to get that updated. Now, having said that, the last time we updated the US Census Bureau was was a snapshot date of January 1st, 2020. So any annexations that have happened between the delivery of that data and January 1st, 2020 won't be in that data. That was a snapshot last time they were updated. So anything that's happened since then, we need to incorporate now. So any annexations that have occurred basically in 2020 or in the first half of 2021 will have to be put through the system and split. So we can split those blocks and allocate the population onto one half or the other. And I'll show that really quickly, but it's kind of a tedious process, but it actually isn't that complicated once you kind of understand what you're doing. You do have opportunities later on to split blocks based on annexations that might occur during redistricting. So after the start of redistricting actually starts, sometime before you actually submit your final boundaries to the legislature, the state, I should say. If there is any annexations that occur during that time, we have processes in place to also split it. But we ask that before redistricting starts that anything that has been done up to that point is split, and so everybody can start on a nice, even, clean slate to start drawing. As you can imagine, changing the blocks underneath plans causes a lot of complications because we're changing out the building blocks we're using to create these plans. But again, I'll go over this quite a lot in depth when we do our LIO special section in late January. You'll also notice here in the WiseLaw Administrator, there are the five phases have start and due dates on them. So those are automatically updated clocks that will be adjusted based on the 90-day period, the 60-day periods that are each stage. So it's up to 60 days. So if you only take 2 days to do stage 1, then the clock starts at that date for stage 2. So if on my example here, it says 3/10/2020 is a start date for supervisory districts in stage 1. If I finish that on 3/12, stage 2 starts on 3/12, and you only have 60 days from 3/12 then to finish stage 2. So you don't have until January 8th there, your clock starts the second the last clock stops. You'll also notice that there's an ASAP under the due date for stage 0. The reason why stage 0 exists right ahead of stage 1 is so you can adjust your blocks. And the reason it says ASAP is because there's no allocation for that time period to split these blocks in state statute. So the more time the LAO takes to split those blocks and get things going, the less time people in stage 1 have to draw in the system, because those blocks need to be updated so they can have something to draw on. So the LAOs need to be kind of ready to go and ready to split right away. And it shouldn't take very long when they actually do it. So hopefully it won't be a huge ordeal. So here's that section 0 I talked about. We were just looking at the screenshot before, and it has a bunch of statutes in there referenced about what we're actually doing here with splitting the geometry. We're using your BAS submission, your municipal boundaries you submit through WISE Decade to split the geometry. And then you go through in that review and confirm each one of those splits. It's actually very similar to the process you're already using when you're submitting CBAS polygons, change polygons. You're just reviewing changes, basically. This is kind of what the process looks like. In a broad sense, that red polygon and that yellow polygon in the section in the center there were a single polygon. The green boundary there is the new municipal boundary, and that red area is the area that's changing. Total population of that block we're splitting, the combination of the red and yellow, was 7 people. But as I need to split this, I need to say, okay, there's 3 or 4 houses right there using my parcel, my local knowledge, my best guesses. There are, I could say 1 person living in that house, and I need to actually change that population down there in the bottom. So your LAO is going to go through here and actually have to change the US Census block geometry and the population allocation for those blocks. So it permanently changes it and moves the population from one municipality to another. So it's not a light thing you're doing, but it's also shouldn't be too difficult, hopefully, with our systems. Once the LAO has said, great, these blocks are perfect, the population's all settled out, they can confirm it using a confirmation code that I'll kind of go over in a second what confirmation codes are, but they'll confirm it and they'll move to stage 1 automatically. So that should send an email out to your to the county clerk, deputy clerk, whoever we happen to have on file for your clerks at the time, letting them know you're ready to go to start drawing supervisory districts. So here's Supervisory District 1. You can see my start date here is 3/10. I have until 5/9 to do it. You'll see the top there, there's a total county population. The number of supervisors you're allowed to have at max is dependent on the total population of the county. So it'll restrict you that way. It'll tell you what your maximum number is and warn you if you're making too many supervisors for what you're allowed to have for your current population of your county. And then there's a menu here for creating a new plan, loading and creating a new plan. If there's time for a demo, I'll show you this quickly at the end, but we'll see how we do. But generally, you create a new plan, enter a plan name, district count will default to the maximum, but you can always change it later or right now. An email address, which is important because this is your specific email address. Everybody in the county signing into the system will be able to see these plans, other than the ones, and see that plans exist. So we need to associate your email and your password with this plan so it's private just to you. And also if you lose your password to your plan, you can recover it and stuff. So enter your email, a password, and then you have the option of starting with what is currently enacted on the ground. So we'll translate the current wards to and supervisory districts to the geography we received from the Census Bureau, so you could use that to start drawing, or we can start with a blank slate. Later on, as people start making plans, you can start plans as their plan and start sharing things that way. Get creative with it. So once that's complete and everybody's happy, you can go to confirm. The county clerk will have a confirmation code and can confirm the plan and submit it, which will, as you can see here on my example, will end the clock. So in my hypothetical world screenshot here, my plan started on February 17th. And I finished in a day. I'm really efficient. We're a super efficient county. We did it all. Go us. We passed all of our boards, everything. So you can see my clock for municipal ward starts on February 17th. So when the county clerk submits the plan and says this is the one we're going to use, email will notified to all the municipal clerks in the county, letting them know that stage 2 is open now. Please come and draw your municipal wards. So when they go in and start drawing their municipal ward plans, they'll see an overlay of the plan that was passed in stage 1, and they'll see, okay, here's the boundaries. Municipalities are not required at all to follow those boundaries. They're supposed to make their best intents, the actual terminology is, but they're supposed to make their best effort to follow the boundaries recommended by the county, so they don't split those supervisory districts in half with their wards, but technically they can disagree with them, and that'll be reconciled in stage 3. Here in the application, you'll see that you can select municipality. So if I'm the town of Albion, I'm municipal clerk there, I want to draw a plan for myself, I'll select town of Albion. Just like in stage 1, I can create a new plan or load an existing plan, plan name, district count. We call them district count just for simplicity, but it's ward count. Maybe we'll change that to be a little more clear. But email, plan, password. Again, you can start as an existing plan, whatever the current ward plan is for town of Albion, or a blank plan. And then further down the page, which is split into 2 sections for the fit on the screen, you'll see kind of a status light up here. So these are, it says the 7 of the 14 municipalities have an approved plan or population less than 1,000. So I believe that was Mike that said that, if you have a population of less than 1,000 in a municipality, you don't necessarily have to create a ward plan, which is totally true. But if you do have more than 1,000, you absolutely need to divide up into wards. So in our example here of our statuses, we see the town of Anapi is gray because that has less than 1,000 people. They still have the total option of drawing ward plan if they want to. There's nothing that stops them from doing that. And as Mike also alluded to, there are many edge case scenarios where that's necessary to either accommodate supervisory aldermanic plans or accommodates congressional or legislative districts, or they might have to split into wards even if they're less than 1,000. But the ones that are required, like the town of Casco there, I'm brutalizing these names, I apologize, Kewaunee County. But it's red because it's over 1,000 and they haven't drawn a plan yet. Whereas in the city of Algoma, Mrs. Peacock passed a plan already, and she did it on February 18th there, and it was ordinance ABC 123. If you scroll to the right side, you'll see a view plan button. They can open up that plan in the viewer. It's a read-only view, so any of it's public domain at this point, so anybody can look and see what the plans were passed and how it looks. Once all the municipalities in stage 2 have created a ward plan and approved it, and it's legitimate, and they can pass it through, and all these reds turn green, all these incompletes turn green, stage 2 will automatically kick over to stage 3. Now, when that happens, let's say the village of Casco, who isn't required to create a ward plan, says, hey, I still wanted to make a plan, they still can go back into the system and draw a plan if they want to, and it'll update everything up in stage 3. We just encourage them to hopefully do that as soon as possible, because we are now in stage 3 here. In stage 3, everything's open to edit. This is your reconciliation, so where you can duke it out over those disagreements between the supervisory boundary and that ward boundary. These statuses are showing if your municipal ward plan is going to jive with your supervisory district plan. By jive, I mean that a ward can only exist in one supervisory district. So if you have a ward in, let's say, the town of Pierce there, that is being divided by supervisory district, your plan's in conflict. So your choice is to either go back into stage 1 and create a new supervisory plan or edit your existing one and repass it, or the town of Pierce needs to go in and draw a ward plan that works with what was passed in stage 1. I can see my example right here. The town of Pierce did not create a plan. They must have been less than 1,000 people. But apparently in stage 1, that township was divided in some way by the supervisory district plan. So they need to go back and make something, or the supervisory district plan needs to be edited. So in stage 2, and in you also have confirmation codes, I should mention. Each municipal clerk will be given a confirmation code to say, I am municipal clerk, I approve of this plan. This is the plan we're going to push through. In stage 3, it's the county clerk's confirmation code that once all these turn green, all of your ward plans jive with your supervisory district plans. Everything looks great. They can enter their county clerk confirmation code there and submit their plans to the legislature. At any time following the completion of your ward plan in stage 2, you may proceed to stage A, which technically takes place during stage 3. It is your drafted aldermanic plans. Most municipalities do not require aldermanic plans. and the ones that do are probably aware of it already if they do. The only warning about starting stage A too early is that if during reconciliation, the underlying wards change, the ward plan changes, then any aldermanic plans made on those wards will be null and void, because aldermanic plans are made by grouping established wards together. They're not made by drawing on blocks. So you use the plan you created in stage 2 in stage A. So those confirmation codes I mentioned, LTSB will provide those out to every LIO, county clerk, and municipal clerk. They're unique to that individual and grants you permissions to confirm things and say that I am that person authorized to confirm it. Some of the codes work double. So LIO, county clerks all work for the municipalities as well. We are aware that many municipalities cede the authority to draw their ward plans to the county. So logistically, it just made sense to give those people those powers. We talked to the Municipal Clerk Association about that, and they thought that was a good idea as well. So it seems that if there's going to be a conflict, though, somewhere, let us know. We'll figure out something else with that. Let's see. So yeah, when you're converting these codes, they just require you to enter in the ordinance or legal identification that was passed at your board meeting or whatever at your municipal level to create this plan officially on your own side, just so it's referenced when it sends it up to us. So when you actually create all these cool plans that you're sending out and all that stuff, it's through the editor. So this is the WYSLR editor. So once you create a new plan or load a plan, this is what's going to pop up for you. The colors are the districts, the numbers on there, the team numbers of the populations of those individual blocks, the blue lines, municipalities. There's some shy away panels on the left here for assignments and an attribute table here on the bottom. See, I'm not sure I have actually. I'm not sure what I have actually in my slides, but so we have things like undo, shuffle colors, merging districts, switching districts, all kind of the fun things to play around with. The system is open right now, by the way, to play around with. And if you have any problems or need to reset anything during this time, please let me know. We're happy to reset the system, bring you back to stage 0, push it forward to stage 3, whatever you want to do. There's labels and layers sections, so you can turn on different labels, show whatever confirmed plans from other stages, show what's currently enacted. There's demographic overlays. We can turn on certain, thematic overlays you can turn on to see where there are hotspots of possible communities of interest. You can change your colors and your attribute tables. In a stairs section, I think I have more later on, but yeah, so here's the attribute table. So the attribute table works by some standard fields here, population and those valid ranges. So this specific section here on the upper right is from a ward plan. The lower left is from a supervisory plan. I know that because there's a valid range column in the right. So that ward, depending on the total population of the municipality, is dependent on how big those wards can be. As Mike said, there is no requirement for exactly even populations for wards, as long as they fall within a valid range. With certain edge case examples. So the system's not going to stop you if you exceed a valid range, if there's a reason why you had to go less than or more than. That can happen if you get drawn into a corner by legislative districts or something. There's other little edge cases where that might actually happen. But generally, like for this example right here, this municipality, all of its wards had to fall within 300 to 1,000 people, and it'll warn you in big red bold letters if your ward is exceeding that in some way. But there's nothing stopping you from having a 300-person ward and a 1,000-person ward. That's acceptable. Whereas in supervisory districts, on like the lower side here, you'll see a deviation metric, which is the population deviation from the ideal population. So the number of districts divided, or the population divided by the number of districts, and then it's how far you deviate from that. Let's see. I do show percent deviation in the ward population as well, the ward table, just because people do like try to balance their wards sometimes. So contiguity, I believe it was Joe that mentioned island territories and contiguity. So municipal islands do exist in Wisconsin, and they can be discontiguous based on the fact that they're just physically not connected to this municipality. Most of the time, we'll have a detection here, though, for contiguity. So you'll see a column there called contiguous. If you click on the ones that are false, it'll zoom you into the sections, the pieces that are not contiguous with the rest of the main bulk of the district, actually. But you can see District 1 there is contiguous. Each block touches each other. 2 corner-to-corner contiguity is not allowed in Wisconsin. So those are considered not contiguous. And 3 are obviously not contiguous because that block with 12 population in it is completely separate from Section 3. If I clicked on that false under District 3 there, it would zoom me in on that block 12 because that's the piece hanging away from the main bulk. So it's a nice way to find issues. So the municipalities, municipal islands, that are either physical islands or municipal islands, may show up as not contiguous, it's false. It has to do with the underlying matrix underneath it that connects these things together, that they don't physically connect, so the matrix didn't pick them up as being connected. But so it's not the end-all be-all decision, contiguous or not, true or false. It's more of a guide indication that maybe I have something that's not connected to it. But if it says it's not contiguous and just because of my island territory, it's probably okay. So compactness, as Joe mentioned as well, there are mathematical ways to describe compactness, and there's also, just the eyeball test. So these have built-in mathematical, the 3 more popular mathematical methods. But there is no one algorithm that says yes compactness, no compactness. So we have a bunch of them in there just so you can look at, and they compare things in different ways. All of them, 0 is the least possible compact, 1 is the most possible compact. We have Polsey-Popper, Schwartzberg, and area convex Hull ratio. So as you change them right here, they'll update automatically in the attribute table, and you can sort and see who your most compact and least compact are. Polsey-Popper is one of the popular ones, and so you can see in my example here that red district is actually the original gerrymander district. So the circumference of that circle, and the black circle, is equal to the perimeter of that district. And then the ratio compares the area of that circle with the area of that district. So you can imagine the area of that district would be quite small compared to the area of the circle. Therefore, it has a very low 0 to 1 comparison. Schwartzberg kind of does the opposite, where it's the area of that circle is equal to the area of that district. And then it compares the perimeters. So that obviously the perimeter of the district is quite a bit larger than that circle, and so it would be equal to a closer to 0 number. And then the last one is quite different than the first 2 in that it is not penalizing necessarily elongated districts. All it penalizes is for convex polygons. So the black boundary on there, if you remember back from your geometry classes in high school, is a convex polygon. It is the minimal amount of polygon I can draw around a polygon that without creating convex or inward vertices. So the area of the district then is compared to the area of the convex hull. So if you have a district that's 100 miles long but only a foot tall, with the perfect rectangle, it'll come back as a 1. But if it's a big C curve, it'll come back as pretty low score. So there's a lot of sharing plan capabilities built into the system because we know that redistricting is a collaborative, 10 minutes left. I'll try it quick. So sharing plans is redistricting is a collaborative effort. You're going to be using either a county board or a city council or however else you're going to be doing it together. So we have a bunch of ways you can share things. And one of those is these URLs you can just copy and paste on an email and send to somebody. It opens up what's called the WYSLR viewer, which is exactly the same as the WYSLR editor. You can still do overlays. You can sort and see all your cool metrics. The only thing it doesn't have is the editing tools. So you can send this off and people will be able to look at these URLs, open the browser up, see your plan, and you can actually sit there and edit it while people are looking at your browser. So if we still live in this COVID world forever, this could be a nice way to have a council meeting where everybody can look at their own map, zoom in where they want to look at, and as you're editing, it'll update for them automatically. All you have to do is refresh the page or hit refresh on the actual application. There's a public share and a private share. So the public share one, you can turn off and on based on if the plan is shared or not. And every time you toggle that share, the URL changes. So if you were wanting to make it public for a while, but then make it private again, just toggle the share off and on, and then that URL that you just formally sent out is dead. The private share URL, once you send that off, if you're still being a little secretive about your plan, not ready for the whole county board to look at it yet, you can send a private share URL to somebody and only that person can see it as long as they have that URL. But that URL is static, so once somebody has that URL, they can always see that plan. Plans can be exported out as GIS files or CSV block assignment files. You can also import those files in. So if you have a GIS person on your staff and they want to do some analysis on their own, change some things manually in ArcMap or ArcPro, and then bring it back in, they're definitely willing to do that. It's definitely fine. You can import other shared plans. If I share my plan, other people can make a new plan based on my plan. So if I think my plan's the bee's knees and I want everyone to start their plans with mine, I can share it and say everyone start with that plan. So if there's questions, please let us know. There's our website right there. It has some great articles and videos from the LRB and the Pi Population Lab at EW, as well as from us too. We'll be updating this more and more as we get more documentation and as we get more things booked coming up here in the future. Looks like we only have about 5 minutes left, so I will save you from the demo this time, but are there any questions right now, I guess? For me or LRB? If you have any questions, by the way, put them in the chat box. That's what I'm looking at right now. I apologize. But again, you'll have many opportunities here in the future as we start scheduling more and more activities. You'll see at other association meetings. Yeah, and LIOs, I'll see you at line meeting tomorrow, and I'll talk about that little session we'll do next week. If you have any enhancements, by the way, about that block splitting process or anything with having to do with those census block geometry confirmations, please let me know. I'm kind of retooling it next couple months to make it as user-friendly as possible. Can I import I got a question here. Can we import a point file into WiseLR as an overlay layer? Yes, we're actually going to be adding in reference layer importations as an enhancement coming up here soon. The ability to add in like feature services will probably be where we'll try to angle it more. So if you have that point file as like something you can host on like ArcGIS Online, and then you can bring it in that way, that'd probably be how we're going to do it. So we don't have to host the data people are submitting to us. We'll kind of see if that that satisfies our Power GIS user needs. I have a question here. Did you say if WiseLR is the only method for municipalities to submit wards? No, it is not the only method. There's nothing in law that says you have to use WiseLR. If you do it in something else, though, I will just import it into WiseLR and then confirm it for you, because other people will need to reference what you're working on through the process. And the only method you had to submit is to email me with it, I guess. As far as I know, every municipality and county did use WiseLR in 2010. I don't think there's any other outliers, but I could be wrong about that, maybe. But yeah, there's nothing that requires you to use it. We do specifically develop WiseLR for state statutes for Wisconsin. It only exists just for Wisconsin. I think there's anything else, and we'll close it up. Okay, great. Thank you for your time. Thank you, WLAA, for hosting us. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you to Joe and Mike and Stacy.